Nolan Parker and I had been best friends since we were 10. Everyone in our town thought we would end up together. The strange part was that they were right, then wrong, then right again. I met him on the afternoon my bicycle chain broke 6 miles from home. I'd been riding alone on this empty country road when the chain just slipped off and I went down hard. My knee was bleeding and my hands were covered in black grease, and I could feel rain starting. I was trying really hard not to cry because crying felt like giving up. Nolan rode past me, then stopped. I didn't really know him. He was the quiet kid who sat by the window at school and read books during lunch while everyone else was being loud. I was the girl who always raised her hand before the teacher finished asking questions. We'd never had an actual conversation. "You can keep going," I told him. "My dad will come get me." "Did you call him?" "No." "Then how does he know?" I stared at the road. "He usually just knows." Nolan didn't ask what that meant. He just flipped my bike over and started working on the chain with the screwdriver that was way too big for the job. It took him 20 minutes and he refused to give up even though I could tell he had no idea what he was doing. When the chain finally caught, I got on and tested the pedals. "It works," I said. He nodded like he'd expected nothing else. "What if it breaks again?" "Then I'll stop again." We rode home side by side and that was it. That was how Nolan Parker became my person. After that day, I started waiting for him at the corner before school. At first, I talked enough for both of us. I told him which teachers were cool and which girls were fake and why my dad always burned pancakes on Sundays. Nolan just listened, but he remembered everything. When I mentioned I hated grape jelly, he traded sandwiches with me before I could even ask. When I said I was scared about the talent show, he sat in the front row, so I'd have one safe face to look at. I pulled him into the world and he made the world feel safer. We were inseparable after that. By middle school, no one said my name without thinking of Nolan. Our families basically merged. My dad kept an extra plate for Nolan at dinner. His mom, Diane, bought me a Christmas stocking and hung it with theirs every December. Summer nights, we'd sit in his backyard while our parents talked and we'd plan futures we didn't understand yet. I wanted to design buildings. Nolan wanted to build things but could never decide what kind. "We'll live in the same city," I said when we were 13. "What if our jobs are in different places?" "Then one of us will pick a different job." "Which one?" I smiled. "We'll figure it out." At 14, that sounded simple. At 16, we started dating other people. I went out with this guy Tyler who played baseball and talked about himself for 2 straight hours. Nolan dated Lena from his photography class. Neither relationship lasted long. I told myself I didn't care about Lena, but the night he took her to a dance, I changed my dress 3 times before deciding not to go. Nolan said Tyler seemed fine, but when Tyler forgot my birthday, Nolan spent all afternoon helping my dad string lights in the backyard, like he'd been waiting for an excuse to make me smile. Everyone saw it before we did. Senior year, Nolan got into this engineering program in Chicago. It was the first time we'd be apart for more than a few weeks. I helped him fill out forms and made him a list of restaurants to try. Then 3 days before he left, I stopped answering his texts. He found me on the bleachers behind our old middle school. "Are you mad at me?" he asked. "No. You've ignored me for 3 days. I'm practicing." "Practicing what?" I looked at him then. "Not having you around." Nolan sat next to me for a while. Neither of us said anything. "It's only 8 weeks, he said. "I know." "I know." "Then what's wrong?" I laughed, but it came out wrong. "You're the person I call when something's wrong." Nolan went quiet and I could see him trying to understand. We'd spent so many years thinking our closeness was normal because it was normal for us. Now with him leaving, it felt like something else. "What if I don't want to be just that person?" he asked. My stomach dropped. What if this ruins everything? What if this is what everything was leading to? He kissed me before I could talk myself out of it. I froze for like 1 second. Then I kissed him back. The first few weeks felt too easy. We already knew everything about each other. We didn't have to pretend or explain or try to be more interesting than we were. Nolan knew I got quiet when I was actually upset, even though everyone thought I got louder. I knew he needed time before answering important questions. Our friends said it made perfect sense. Diane cried and said she'd been waiting for us to catch up. For a long time, it seemed like everyone had been right. Nolan went to Chicago for the summer. I visited twice. We called every night, sometimes for 3 hours. When he came back, we went to colleges 40 minutes apart and arranged our schedules so we could see each other almost every day. When I had an architecture project due, Nolan stayed up cutting model walls while I worked on drawings. When he doubted his engineering major, I reminded him of every machine he'd ever taken apart and rebuilt. We celebrated with takeout in his car and talked about apartments and careers and the dog we'd get after graduation. We rarely fought. When we did, one of us usually gave in before it got uncomfortable. That seemed like proof we were right for each other. It wasn't. The change was so small I didn't notice at first. Second year of college, my classmates invited me to this weekend design group. I wanted to go, but it met on Saturdays, the day I usually spent with Nolan. "It's fine," I told them. "I already have plans." That same month, Nolan stopped going to photography club because meetings ended after my train home. He never told me. He just put his camera in a drawer and got busier with my life instead of his. Our friends saw less of us. Invitations slowed. We had each other, so we didn't complain. After graduation, I got a job at a small architecture firm near home. Nolan took an engineering job in the same county. We rented an apartment halfway between both offices. For the first few months, it felt like the future we'd always imagined. We bought a secondhand couch and argued about the coffee maker and adopted a dog named Cooper after I found him outside a grocery store. Then our lives started getting smaller. I'd call Nolan before making even tiny decisions. He'd check my schedule before accepting anything from coworkers. If one of us came home late, the other felt rejected. If one wanted a quiet night alone, the other asked if something was wrong. We still loved each other. That's what made it hard to see. When I got overwhelmed at work, Nolan took over cooking and laundry and bills. He said it was temporary. Months later, he was still doing everything because I felt guilty when he asked for help, and he hated making me feel guilty. When Nolan's company offered him a 6-week project in Denver, I tried to sound excited. Then I spent the whole night awake imagining the apartment without him. The next morning, he declined it. They needed an answer. He told me, "You didn't even talk to me. I knew you didn't want me to go." I never said that. You didn't have to. I wanted to argue, but part of me was relieved. That scared me more than anything. We promised to do better. We made plans to see friends separately. I went back to a weekend design class. Nolan took his camera out. For a few weeks, things improved. Then I got offered this 9-month urban design fellowship in Boston. It was everything I dreamed about. The fellowship paid less than my current job, but I'd be working with people I admired. My supervisor said it could change my career. I carried the acceptance letter in my bag for 11 days. Every night, I almost told Nolan. Every night, I imagined his face and couldn't do it. On the final day, I emailed the program and declined. I told myself it was the adult decision. We shared rent. Cooper needed both of us. Nolan's job was here. Moving for 9 months would be expensive and complicated. Under every practical reason was a simpler one. I was afraid to find out who I'd become without him. 2 months later, Nolan's company offered him a promotion in Chicago. He'd lead a team and work on projects he'd wanted for years. Better salary, moving costs cover everything. He turned it down before leaving his manager's office. He didn't tell me. The truth came out on a Tuesday in October when we had our college friends Ryan and Natalie over for dinner. It was the first time we'd hosted anyone in months. While I was in the kitchen, Natalie asked how I felt about Boston. Nolan looked up. "What about Boston?" The room went silent. I stopped moving. Natalie realized her mistake. "I thought she told you." Nolan waited until they left to ask again. "What about Boston?" I put 4 untouched plates in the sink. I turned it down. "When?" "July. 3 months ago, and you didn't tell me." "There was nothing to tell. I wasn't going." "Why?" I gave him all the reasons I'd been repeating to myself. "Money, the apartment, Cooper, our schedules." Nolan listened until I ran out. "Did you want it?" I looked away. "That's not the point." "That's the only point." "What was I supposed to do? Leave you here for almost a year?" "You were supposed to let me be part of the decision. You would have told me to go." "Maybe I would have gone with you?" "And given up your job?" Nolan didn't answer fast enough. I stared at him. "What happened?" "Nothing, Nolan." He sat down at the table. "They offered me a promotion in Chicago." I waited. I said no. "When?" "August." Now it was my turn to feel betrayed. "You didn't tell me." "You would have felt pressured to move." "Maybe I would have wanted to move." "You had a job here. And you had a career there." We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen, both angry at each other for making the same choice. "I chose you," Nolan said. Something in my chest cracked. "I never asked you to." The words landed harder than I meant them. Nolan stepped back. "You didn't have to." That's the problem. We keep deciding what the other person needs and then acting like it's love. It was love. Then why do I feel trapped by it? Nolan went silent. I started crying, which made him want to cross the room and hold me. He took one step, then stopped. I could see him realizing that comforting me might end the conversation without solving anything. "What do you want?" he asked. I wiped my face. "I don't know. Boston. This apartment. A different job. I don't know." "What do you want that has nothing to do with me?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "Do you know what you want?" I asked. Nolan looked around the apartment. The furniture we'd chosen together, our shared friends. Even Cooper was part of our story now. I watched him try to imagine his life without me standing inside every plan. He couldn't. That scared both of us. We didn't break up that night. We tried to fix it. For 3 months we made rules. 1 night a week apart. Separate plans with friends. No making decisions for each other. We spoke carefully and apologized constantly. But every bit of distance felt like punishment. If I went out, Nolan wondered if I was happier without him. If he worked late, I wondered if he was preparing to leave. We'd spent so many years treating closeness as proof of love that independence felt like rejection. One Sunday morning, I found Nolan on the kitchen floor next to Cooper. He'd gotten another email about Chicago. The position still wasn't filled. They were asking one last time. "You should take it," I said. "What happens to us?" I sat across from him. "I think we need to stop making that the first question." Nolan lowered his head. "I love you," I said. "But I don't know if I love you because I choose you or because I never learned how not to need you." Is there a difference? There has to be. Nolan looked at me for a long time. "What are you saying?" I'd rehearsed this alone, but saying it still felt like tearing something open. We know how to love each other. We just don't know how to be ourselves while we do it. His face told me he understood. That didn't make it hurt less. We agreed to separate. Nolan would take Chicago. I'd apply for another program. We wouldn't promise to wait. No calling each other during lonely nights. No asking mutual friends for updates. Real space, not the fake kind. I packed slowly. Every object felt like it belonged to both of us. I took only what was clearly mine. Cooper stayed with Nolan because his new place allowed dogs and I didn't know where I'd be living yet. On my last morning, I carried the final box to my car. Nolan stood on the sidewalk. For a second, we both looked like the kids we'd been. If I drive away, I said, here, are you gonna come after me? Nolan wanted to say yes. I could see it on his face. He wanted to repeat the promise he'd made by my broken bicycle 20 years ago. Instead, he said, not this time. I nodded. It was the answer I needed and the one I hated most. I got in the car and drove away. Nolan didn't follow. The first few weeks, I mistook pain for proof I'd made the wrong choice. Nolan moved to Chicago with Cooper and 6 boxes. I didn't see his apartment then, but he described it to me years later. It was tiny and faced another brick building. The kitchen light made everything look gray. On his first night, he ate pizza on the floor and reached for his phone 3 times. Each time, he stopped himself. He told me the hardest part wasn't being alone. It was realizing how many ordinary thoughts had always gone straight to me. A strange dog on the sidewalk, a badly designed staircase, a song we used to hate together. He had to learn that a thought could still matter even if no one else heard it. I moved to Boston after finding a junior position with an urban design firm. Not the fellowship I'd rejected, and the work was less exciting than I'd hoped. My apartment had bad heat and a bedroom barely big enough for a bed. During my second month, I made an error in a presentation. My supervisor corrected me in front of a client. I locked myself in a bathroom and typed Nolan's name into my phone. I didn't call. I went back to the meeting, admitted my mistake, and fixed it. That small victory belonged only to me. We heard about each other through other people even though we'd asked not to. My dad mentioned Diane had posted a picture of Cooper in snow. Ryan told Nolan I'd helped design a neighborhood playground. Neither of us asked for more. Our lives slowly got bigger. Nolan later told me a coworker invited him to join a weekend cycling group. His first answer was almost no because he wouldn't know anyone there. Then, he caught himself doing the same thing he'd always done, waiting for me to make an unfamiliar place feel safe. So he went alone. He got lost on the first ride, showed up 20 minutes late for breakfast, and still went back the next Saturday. That detail mattered to me when I finally heard it. The Nolan I had known would have treated one awkward morning as proof that he didn't belong. This Nolan let himself be awkward and tried again. He also started taking photos again. Bridges, train stations, dogs in city parks, strangers at bus stops. He said the camera gave him a reason to notice a world that didn't know anything about Nolan and Maya. I understood that better than I wanted to. I took an evening ceramics class. I was terrible at it. That's part of why I stayed. No one expected me to be good and Nolan wasn't there to rescue the pieces when they collapsed. I made friends who'd never met him. They knew me as Maya, not as half of a famous hometown pair. We both dated, though neither relationship got serious. Nolan spent 6 months with a nurse named Rachel. I only knew what mutual friends mentioned at the time, and I tried not to ask questions. Much later, he told me she was funny and direct. When she wanted time alone, she just said so. He liked her, but he also began noticing how often he tried to become whatever she needed before she asked. One night, Rachel handed back the takeout menu he'd chosen for her. You know you're allowed to want something different from me, right? He laughed because it sounded simple. Then, according to him, he sat there with the menu in his hand and realized he didn't know how to answer. They ended kindly 2 weeks later. I dated Owen for almost a year. He traveled constantly and valued independence. At first, that felt healthy. Later, I realized I'd chosen someone who asked for so little I never had to risk depending on him. When Owen got offered work in Seattle, he accepted before telling me. I didn't ask him to stay. I didn't follow either. That relationship ended without drama. It taught me that independence alone wasn't intimacy. 4 years passed. By then, Nolan was a project director with friends who called him without asking if I'd be there. He bought an old townhouse and spent weekends fixing it badly, then fixing it again. I'd become an associate at my firm. I helped lead a project that turned an abandoned lot into affordable apartments and a public garden. For the first time, I could look at a building and no part of it existed because of me. Neither of us was unhappy. Neither of us had forgotten. Then one Friday afternoon, our old 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Dawson, retired. The elementary school made a social media page where former students could share memories. Mrs. Dawson posted dozens of pictures from her 37 years teaching. One showed 2 10-year-olds beside a country road. I was sitting near my red bicycle. Nolan was crouched next to me, hands on the broken chain. Rain had darkened his shirt. I was looking at him like I already trusted him with every problem I'd ever have. Mrs. Dawson wrote underneath, Nolan Parker fixing Maya Collins's bicycle on the last day of 5th grade. These two never left anyone behind. I wonder where they are now. Former students started commenting. Someone tagged me. Someone tagged Nolan. A nostalgia account shared it. Then a bigger account shared it with the caption, sometimes soulmates meet before they know the word. By Saturday morning, thousands of people had seen it. Strangers said we must be married. Some wanted a new photo. Others told stories about childhood friends they'd lost. A woman in Texas wrote that if we weren't together, someone should find us and fix the mistake. I saw the post while drinking coffee in my apartment. I read the comments twice, then I laughed until I cried. The internet had taken one quiet moment and turned it into a complete love story. No one saw Boston or Chicago or the unanswered calls or the kitchen, where two people realized they'd stopped knowing themselves. Nolan told me later that he saw the photo about an hour after I did, when 3 coworkers sent it to him. One wrote, "Is this why you know how to fix every bike in the office? It's a girl." Another wrote, "Please tell me you married her." He closed the messages without answering. He said he spent the rest of the afternoon pretending to work while that old road kept running through his head. That evening his phone showed my name for the first time in 4 years. "Apparently half the internet thinks you still owe me a repaired bicycle," I wrote. He later admitted he stared at it for almost 10 minutes. Then he typed, "The chain was never the difficult part." I answered, "No, it wasn't." We exchanged 6 messages that night. Neither mentioned love. Neither asked if the other was seeing someone. We talked about Mrs. Dawson and the old road and how I still owned the red bicycle frame because my dad refused to throw it away. The next night we talked on the phone. At first we were formal. I asked about Chicago. He asked about Boston. Then Cooper barked in the background and I started crying. "Is he there?" "He's old," Nolan said. And louder, "Put me on speaker." Cooper recognized my voice. He ran around searching for me while Nolan tried to calm him. I laughed through tears. For 1 minute the 4 lost years disappeared. That scared both of us. We agreed to meet in our hometown the next weekend. My dad still lived there and Diane had invited Nolan for dinner. We picked a diner near the high school because it didn't belong to either family. Nolan got there first. When I walked through the door he knew me immediately. My hair was shorter. I carried myself different. I didn't scan the room looking for someone to tell me where to sit. I stopped when I saw him. Nolan looked older around the eyes. He wore a blue shirt I'd never seen. A camera strap crossed his shoulder. "You brought it back," I said, pointing at the camera. "A few years ago. I'm glad." We hugged. It lasted 1 second longer than old friends and way less than either of us wanted. Conversation came slowly at first. Then all at once, I told him about the public garden. He told me about his townhouse and the staircase he'd rebuilt twice because the first version leaned left. We talked about Rachel and Owen without jealousy. We admitted the good parts instead of using them to hurt each other. Nolan listened when I described a difficult meeting I'd handled alone. He looked proud but didn't say he wished he'd been there to help. I listened when he described leading a team through a failed design. I didn't tell him what he should have done different. We were still ourselves. We were also people the other had never met. After lunch we walked past our old school. The air smelled like leaves and chimney smoke. I stopped near the bleachers where he'd kissed me before Chicago. "I used to think this was where our story started," I said. "Maybe it was where it changed." I looked at him. "Do you ever wish we hadn't become a couple?" Nolan thought about it. "No. I wish we'd known how to do it without disappearing." "Me too." We walked another block before I spoke again. "I still love you." Nolan stopped. My voice was steady even though my hands were shaking. "I didn't come here planning to say that, and I'm not saying the photo means anything. But 4 years didn't change it. They changed me." The feeling stayed. His face changed when I said it. Years later, he admitted he'd imagined hearing those words more times than he could count. What he'd never imagined was saying no. "I can't do this again," he said. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I don't mean I don't care about you." "Then what do you mean?" "I mean I don't want us back." The words hurt him too. I could see it. He forced himself to continue. "The people we were loved each other, but they were destroying each other. I don't know if this is us talking or a photo and 10,000 strangers telling us how the story should end. I didn't message you because of strangers. Maybe not. But you ended things with Owen less than a year ago. You came home. You saw that picture. How do I know I'm not the safest road back to something familiar?" I looked away. For a second he looked like he wanted to take it all back. Instead he waited. "You don't know," I said finally. "Neither do I." I nodded. Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't ask him to comfort me. "Then I won't ask you to trust what I say today," I said. "You can watch what I do next." I walked to my car alone. Nolan stayed on the sidewalk. For the second time in his life, he watched me leave and didn't follow. He told me later that this time didn't feel exactly like losing me. It felt like respecting the answer he'd given, even though the answer hurt both of us. We didn't speak for 3 weeks. I went back to Boston. I told no one Nolan had rejected me except one close friend. I didn't post a sad message under the photo. I didn't ask Mrs. Dawson or our families to intervene. I went to work. I met deadlines. I went to ceramics class and made a bowl that leaned badly. I kept living the life I'd built. What I didn't know was that Nolan was watching from a distance without meaning to. Mutual friends mentioned that I'd gone back to work in ceramics class. He saw that I didn't suddenly show up at his mom's house or send long messages at midnight. I didn't ask him to save me from the pain he'd caused. He explained all of this much later, when we were finally able to talk about those weeks without trying to defend ourselves. One Saturday, he rode 40 miles with his cycling group. During the last mile, he said, he realized he'd spent the whole morning wanting to tell me about it. Not because he needed praise. Not because he needed advice. He just wanted me to know. That difference was small enough to miss, but it was the reason he finally reached out. That evening, he sent me a photo of his bike beside Lake Michigan. I replied with a photo of my crooked ceramic bowl. That bowl looks unsafe, he wrote. It has character, I answered. We started talking again. At first once a week. We agreed not to call it a relationship. When Nolan visited Boston for work, he asked me to dinner. When I went to a conference in Chicago, I stayed at a hotel instead of his place. We learned to meet as adults instead of falling back into old roles. Nolan met my friends. They didn't treat him like the missing half of my life. I met his cycling group and discovered he was the one who got lost most often. We argued too. When Nolan canceled dinner for work, I told him I was disappointed without claiming it proved he didn't care. When I considered a 6-month project in Denver, I told Nolan before deciding. Do you want to go? He asked. Yes. The old Nolan would have offered to move. The old me would have waited for him to object. Then you should go, he said. I was hoping you'd say that. Doesn't mean I like it. I know. We survived the 6 months. Some calls were short. One visit got canceled by a snowstorm. We missed each other without treating it like an emergency. By the time I got back to Boston, we'd stopped pretending we were only friends. Nolan asked me to be with him again while we stood outside an airport baggage claim. No music, no crowd, no photo. I still don't want us back, he said. I smiled. Good. I want whatever this is. Me too. We kissed for the first time in 4 years. For 9 months, the new relationship worked. It wasn't as effortless as the first one. That's one reason it was better. We kept separate apartments. We visited but didn't automatically spend every weekend together. Nolan sometimes chose his friends. I sometimes chose work. Neither treated those choices as proof love was fading. Then Nolan invited me to Thanksgiving at Diane's. I hesitated. Diane had been polite during our few meetings since the reunion but never warm. My Christmas stocking didn't hang in the Parker living room anymore. Does she know I'm coming? I asked. Yes. Does she want me there? Nolan paused. She said it was my decision. I heard what he didn't say. Still, I went. Dinner started fine. Nolan's sister Sophie asked about my work. Cooper slept under the table with his head on my shoe. Diane served the sweet potatoes I'd loved as a teenager, though she didn't mention remembering. The trouble started when Sophie asked if I was planning to move to Chicago. We haven't decided, I said. My firm might let me split time between offices. Diane put her fork down. Nolan has worked very hard for the life he has here. I know, I said. He finally has stability. Nolan looked at his mom. Mom, I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. No one else spoke. Diane turned to me. The last time you two made plans, he gave up Chicago for you. Then you left him anyway. I felt the old instinct to apologize for everything. I forced myself to breathe. That's not exactly what happened, I said. I was the one who drove here because he could barely get out of bed. I know he was hurt. Do you? Because you had Boston waiting for you. Nolan spoke quietly. Not tonight, Mom. It was meant to stop the argument. Instead, it told me he wanted silence more than truth. Diane continued. Some people belong in the past. A photograph doesn't change that. I looked at Nolan. He looked angry and uncomfortable but said nothing more. I folded my napkin and put it beside my plate. Thank you for dinner, I said. Nolan stood. Maya, I'm going back to my dad's. I'll come with you. No, stay and have the conversation you should have had 4 years ago. I hugged Sophie, touched Cooper's head, and left. Nolan followed me onto the porch. I'm sorry, he said. I pulled on my coat. I can handle your mom not liking me. She's afraid. I know, and she has reasons. But I can't build a life where you stay silent to keep the room comfortable. I told her to stop. You said not tonight. That means she can disrespect me tomorrow. Nolan had no answer. I opened my car door. I don't need you to lose your family for me, I said. I need to know you won't lose yourself or me trying to keep everyone happy. Then I drove away. I wasn't in the dining room for what happened next. Nolan told me the whole conversation when he came to my dad's house later that night, and Sophie confirmed it the next morning. By the time they finished telling me, I could picture every second of it. Nolan went back to the dining room. Diane was clearing plates like the evening had just gotten slightly awkward. Sophie stood by the sink with her arms crossed. You should go after her, Diane said. No. His mom looked surprised. This isn't about chasing Maya, Nolan said. It's about talking to you. Diane set down a plate. He sat at the table. His hands were shaking, he told me, but he didn't rush. That mattered because rushing was how he usually escaped a difficult conversation. He would say whatever made the other person feel better, then spend days resenting a promise no one had forced him to make. This time he let the silence stay uncomfortable. You were there when I fell apart, he said. I'll always be grateful for that. Then you understand why I'm worried. I understand, but you don't know the whole story. For the first time he told her about Boston. He explained that I'd given up my opportunity before he gave up Chicago. He told Diane how we'd both made decisions for each other, then blamed each other for feeling trapped. She didn't destroy me, he said. We built a life where neither of us knew how to stand alone. Ending it was the first honest thing we'd done in years. Diane shook her head. You didn't see yourself afterward. I did. I was there. I can't watch it happen again. You're allowed to be afraid for me. You're not allowed to make decisions for me. Diane stared at him. Nolan continued. You don't have to trust this relationship yet. But if you want to be part of my life, you'll treat Maya with respect. No comments about her using me. No blaming her for choices I made. No asking me to choose between you. And if I can't, the old Nolan would have softened it before answering. Then I'll see less of you until you can. Diane's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that for her? No, Nolan said. I'm doing it because I should have done it even if Maya never came back. Sophie turned to the sink to hide a small smile. Nolan didn't leave right away. He helped clear the table. He packed leftovers. He told his mom he loved her. Then he drove to my dad's house. I was sitting on the front steps in an old college sweatshirt. Nolan sat beside me, leaving space between us. I talked to her, he said, because you were afraid I'd leave. Nolan looked at the dark road. Partly, he admitted. But I said something I should have said years ago, even if you never came back. I waited. I told her the breakup wasn't your fault. I told her she can be worried, but she can't disrespect you or decide for me. What did she say? She cried. I almost apologized for having a boundary. I gave a small laugh. But you didn't. I didn't. We sat together without touching. I don't want you to cut her off, I said. I know. And I don't expect her to trust me tomorrow. I know that too. But I won't sit through another dinner like that. You won't have to. I finally reached for his hand. That wasn't the night everything became easy. Diane didn't apologize right away. For weeks she communicated with Nolan through short texts. When Christmas came, Nolan told her we'd visit for 2 hours, but we'd leave if she made another comment about our past. Diane agreed. My old stalking didn't come back that year. I didn't ask about it. The visit stayed polite. That was enough for a start. Over the next months, Diane watched instead of judging. She saw me accept a major project without asking Nolan's permission. She saw Nolan spend a planned weekend with his cycling group while I visited friends. She saw us disagree about where to live and return to the discussion without threats or sacrifice. One spring afternoon, Diane called me directly. I found something in a box, she said. It was the old Christmas stocking. I thought you might want it, she added. I understood it was the closest to an apology she could manage right then. Yes, I said. I would. Nolan and I didn't move in together until almost 2 years after the photo went viral. We chose a house outside Chicago with a small office for me and a garage Nolan could fill with tools. I kept my job and traveled to Boston twice a month. Nolan sometimes complained about the airport schedule. I sometimes complained that his bike parts showed up in every room. We no longer confused frustration with failure. Cooper died that winter at 15. We buried his ashes under a tree in the backyard. Nolan cried with his head in my lap. I didn't try to solve his grief. I just stayed beside him until he was ready to stand. Early summer, Mrs. Dawson mailed us a printed copy of the viral photo. She included a note. The internet keeps asking for an ending, she wrote. I told them endings belong to the people living them. Nolan framed it but didn't hang it right away. One Saturday morning, he asked me to take a bike ride with him. We went back to the same country road where the photo was taken. The pavement had been widened and new houses stood beyond the trees. My dad had restored the old red bicycle, though he'd replaced nearly every original part. Nolan rode beside me on his own bike. When we reached the place where the chain had broken, Nolan stopped. I looked down. My bike's fine, I know. He took a small box from his jacket. I stared at it, then at him. Nolan didn't kneel right away. When we were kids, I thought loving you meant I should never let you get lost, he said. Then I thought it meant giving up whatever kept me from staying beside you. I was wrong both times. My eyes filled with tears. You don't need me to repair your life, he continued. I don't need you to tell me who I am. You can choose another city or another project or another road. I know that now. He opened the box. And I also know I want to spend my life choosing the road beside yours. Will you marry me? I laughed and covered my face with both hands. Yes, I said. But I'm keeping my own bike. Nolan smiled. That's the point. We got married the next fall in Mrs. Dawson's backyard. Small wedding. Ryan and Natalie came. Sophie gave a speech. Diane sat in the front row and cried before the ceremony started. My old stocking didn't matter anymore, but Diane had put the framed bicycle photo near the guest book. Mrs. Dawson took a new picture after the ceremony. In the old photo, Nolan had been crouched beside my broken bicycle while I waited for him to fix it. In the new one, we stood beside 2 working bikes, neither holding the other up. We sent it to Mrs. Dawson's school page with one sentence. Me found each other, but first we had to find ourselves. The internet loved the ending. Nolan and I knew it wasn't really an ending. There would be new jobs, and separate trips, and difficult dinners and mornings, when love felt less like fate and more like a decision. There'd be times when one of us wanted to fix a problem the other needed to face alone. There'd be roads we couldn't travel side by side. But we no longer believed love meant never separating. We'd once been 2 kids who promised to come back whenever the other got lost. Years later, we understood something better. Love wasn't one person turning around to rescue the other. It was 2 people who knew how to travel alone and still chose, again and again, to take the road beside each other.